Welcome to the messy car. It's beautiful weather. Snow's melting. You can hear the trickling of water from the drainage pipes. And today the topic is the fall of Hyperion. The fall of Hyperion, just like the fall of winter. The fall of winter. Winter is now over. Hyperion is now over, is it? I don't know. So, The Fall of Hyperion is the sequel to the Hugo Award-winning Hyperion. Now, Hyperion, written by Dan Simmons, concerns this group of pilgrims who, it's a sci-fi novel, this group of pilgrims who make the trek to the planet. They make the trek to this planet, Hyperion, and they're on this pilgrimage, and they're not really sure why. I should say they do know why they are themselves on this pilgrimage, most of them, but they're not really sure about the others, and they don't really understand the grand significance of this pilgrimage. And it has a big significance because a lot of events are happening in Hyperion, such as an invasion from the Ousters, which are a group of humans that essentially mutated and became sort of post-human, and they started developing wings and stuff like that, and they went to the farther reaches of the galaxy, other galaxies, and they almost give the vibe of the sort of barbarians or something like that, like the other people who are outside of civilization. But we come to see that that's not really the case. They're not really that barbaric, or at least they're not any more barbaric than the hegemony of man, which is the sort of intergalactic, we can call it an empire. It's run by a CEO. It's kind of I don't know if they call themselves an empire, but it's a sort of connection of a bunch of different planets and galaxies that encompass the web, and that it's called the hegemony of man. And these are essentially we can equate them with the civilized world. Now, Hyperion I quite enjoyed. It was told through, what was the most interesting about Hyperion was that it was told through the perspectives of these different pilgrims. They each told their own story, and their story had some relation to the planet Hyperion. Now, the planet Hyperion, to backtrack just a bit, the planet Hyperion is actually outside of the reaches of the hegemony, in a way. It's outside of the reaches of Farcaster portals. So it's considered an outback planet because it's not accessible by Farcaster portals. And this is an important point because the Farcaster portals were created by the AI Technocore. This is a sort of grouping of the AI entities in the world of Hyperion, in the world of these novels. And they sort of inhabit the data sphere, but they also are present in physical form in the world through either cybrids, or they have officials who I think they are themselves cybrids in a way. Cybrids are essentially humans with human flesh, but they have an AI consciousness. Now, this is very complicated. It's quite convoluted. There's a lot of stuff going on. And before I can even talk about Fall of Hyperion, I have to brief that type of stuff. Now, going back to why I liked Hyperion, I liked it because it was told through these different perspectives. Very much akin. It's very much compared to Chaucer's The Canterbury Tales, but it's a bit different in the way that each of the stories sort of brings a more filling picture of what's happening in Hyperion, because to be honest, you're quite inundated and confused with many of the things that are happening in Hyperion in the book. And while Dan Simmons kind of continuously repeats these things, there are so many different things happening and a lot of mysteries in the novel. And as the different stories get told, you start to get a better picture of what's actually happening. and it kind of creates this sort of tense, mysterious atmosphere for Hyperion, in my opinion. The stories are told through slightly different, probably not different styles, but they're different genres. Simmons' writing style is pretty uniform throughout, but it's told through, there are different genres, you can say, that the different stories have. Now, Fall of Hyperion continues the story of Hyperion, because Hyperion ends on a bit of a cliffhanger. It's a bit of a non-ending. You don't really understand, you don't really get a good picture of what's actually happening in this world. You get like, I would say you get like a 50%, 60% idea of what's happening in this world. You start to grow some, you start to develop your own theories, your ideas about what's happening in this, but nothing is really plain at the end of Hyperion. Except for the fact that the AI Technocore has a significant interest in Hyperion in some way. Okay, that becomes quite apparent at the end of Hyperion. Now, the Fall of Hyperion. The Fall of Hyperion doesn't engage with the same narrative devices, or narrative devices, storytelling devices, in the sense that they're different stories interwoven that create a sort of better picture. It doesn't engage with that as much. I don't have my seatbelt still on. Get this off. Instead, it's told through the dreams, essentially, and not just the dreams, but the point of view of a cybrid of John Keats. Now, the cybrid is actually called Joseph Severn, who was one of John Keats' physicians, the real John Keats. This is a real poet, a 19th century poet, romantic poet, and he's the poet that wrote the poem. It's an unfinished poem, Hyperion. And this is very important. If you've read Hyperion or Fall of Hyperion, you know John Keats is... these two books are essentially, like, in some ways, like love letters in a way. They're total... they're total worship of John Keats in a way. Dan Simmons will not hesitate to constantly make references to Keats, make references to many poets and other thinkers, philosophers as well, particularly in the English Romantic tradition. There's a huge emphasis on that. Byron is mentioned. I think Shelley is also mentioned a few times. But that being said, going back, I'm off tangent a bit. Fall of Hyperion follows Joseph M. Severn, who is one of the reincarnations we can think of John Keats. But he is John Keats. He's essentially an AI consciousness from what I understand, an AI consciousness of John Keats. So an AI attempted to create the consciousness of John Keats, and they put it in the body of Joseph M. Severn. They tailored this body for Joseph M. Severn, as it would be like Joseph M. Severn's body, who was in real life, real world, we're not talking about Hyperion, who was actually John Keats' physician. Okay? So, it's told by essentially a mixture of his dreams and his, I guess you could say his realities, his point of views. And he becomes a sort of attaché, you can say, an advisor, maybe advisor would be better, to the CEO of the hegemony, Mina Gladstone. Now, Mina Gladstone was a character that showed up very sparsely in Hyperion. She was mentioned a few times, and she showed up. I think she had a few scenes, but you got like a little picture of her, but not too much. In Fall of Hyperion, she's a significant character. She really is a significant character. And Joseph M. Severin is the main character, we could say. Meanwhile, the other pilgrims take a little bit of a backseat in some ways, and they kind of become, to the narrative, they kind of become tools in a way for showing what is happening in Hyperion. Now, sometimes it gets really complicated, and it's not that I don't know exactly just that I don't know what's happening, but I don't really understand the significance of some of the events that happen to many of the characters. They don't seem all too significant to me. Essentially, the Shrike, this scary bad boy who's another one of the mysteries, the Shrike essentially starts to pretty much torment every single character in Hyperion that's on the planet of Hyperion. And there is a part of the book, essentially at the start, where it feels like this is a horror movie, and it's just, this person is disappearing, this person is found dead, this person, boom, 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 like they're all dropping like flies. There's a portion where it feels like that. Once again, this is all told through the dreams of Joseph M. Severin. These are his dreams. And he's relaying this information to Mina Gladstone so that she can understand a bit more about what is happening in Hyperion herself. Now, that is a lot of stuff going on, but that's essentially the gist of this. But we can talk now broader themes about Hyperion. Essentially, a theme that starts to crop up is the over-reliance on technology, and it being to the detriment, essentially, to humanity and the hegemony. The over-reliance on the technocore. This story, it would be hard for me to really argue that it has a kind look on technology. It has a sort of, perhaps anti-technology would be a bit too strong, but Dan Simmons definitely seems to argue for caution on over-reliance of technology and over-reliance on these AI who themselves have their own project. Essentially, they're split into 3 different fractions. The stables, who seek to keep humanity as they are. The volatiles, who seek to who see humanity as sort of like a species that should be eradicated, and the ultimates, who essentially their own goal, the ultimate, is to create like an ultimate intelligence, and they are kind of ambivalent as to humans, essentially. And if humans can help create this ultimate intelligence, they're welcome to be a part of this world. Alright, that was another tangent on the Technocore. The Technocore play a significantly larger role in Fall of Hyperion. Fall of Hyperion, I would say it's essentially you're uncovering what is going on with the Technocore. That is much more of the case. You slightly start to understand a bit more about the Shrike. I think it seems like the Shrike was an entity. I don't really want to, I might be completely wrong, but the Shrike definitely has ties to the Technocore. I wrote down the Shrike as a neutral entity. I think the Shrike can be looked at in a way as a neutral entity. Empathy is also an aspect in this novel. Empathy as a sort of secret sauce to create the ultimate intelligence, or this maybe not ultimate, I don't know if it was ultimate intelligence or something that was called the void which binds. I'm not sure if that's the same as the ultimate intelligence, but anyway, you can tell how complicated this novel gets in many ways. And Dan Simmons kind of keeps hitting you with these concepts, and many of them become ingrained in you and you understand them, but a lot of them are a bit fuzzy. going back to empathy being a sort of element in the world, empathy seems to be tied to a human element in the world, which is why the eradication of humans for the AI might not be the greatest idea. And I believe the Shrike is sort of a balance to this empathy, a sort of a contrast to this empathy. The sort of a sort of apathetic bloodlust. You can't even say that the Shrike has a bloodlust necessarily, but this sort of like apathetic destruction, this apathetic, consistent destruction and torment is sort of a balance to this empathy component. For some reason, to me, I read the Shrike. The Shrike doesn't seem to me as much of a villain. Now, some people might have felt otherwise when they read it, but the Shrike is essentially just an entity that has always been there, but at the same time kind of arose because of this issue. It's a bit of a paradox. Another theme is distance and space. Distance and space as distance and space, and that ties into the over-reliance on technology. How distance and space can be diminished through technology, and how that can have effects on time. That was seen in Hyperion with the console story, and also like where certain things can reside in the world. They don't have to reside necessarily in physical space as it may seem, but they can reside inside of physical objects, if that makes sense. And I can only expand on this by kind of spoiling a big thing in Fall of Hyperion, and that is as to where the Technocore reside. And the Technocore, it turns out, reside inside the Farcaster systems. So they essentially exist within an object. They exist within objects, the creation of objects, these Farcaster objects. So I think space and time is definitely something that props up within the story. Also, the Ouster invasion is and how it's kind of a slow burning but at the same time swift invasion. How they weren't able to detect it because they didn't use. I think the Ousters didn't use a certain system, a sort of I don't know if it's a portal system or what it's called. The Ousters essentially didn't go at a certain speed. They didn't go fast enough to be detected. So distance and space is something to watch out for. Obviously, God is something that constantly props up with the AI Technocore trying to create a sort of God. And another theme that becomes incredibly apparent at the end of Fall of Hyperion, and also was apparent at the end of Hyperion through the Consul's Tale once again. It's time to drink some water. Drink another one. Another one was the a sort of critique of globalization, because globalization and its effects on the hegemony have destroyed many cultures of these planets through them being interconnected through these Farcaster systems. And that really starts to prop up at the end intensely, and it's almost like that is it becomes so intense that this seems to be a very significant message for Dan Simmons. That this interconnectedness is not always a good thing. The interconnectedness of the world destroys cultures, and it leaves humans sort of too reliant on this connection, and not as reliant on their own soil, their own people. Overall, Fall of Hyperion, I'm glad I read it. That being said, it does lack the intimacy, I feel, of Hyperion. Oh, I'm talking too much. My throat. It does lack the intimacy of Hyperion. And the mysterious aspects, sort of, to me, they become a bit too convoluted, and there are a lot of questions that still remain in this world. I found myself often having to look up things. It did make me look back at Hyperion on a slightly less favorable way, because Dan Simmons' style his writing isn't horrible, and it's not bad, but his style itself isn't the most interesting to read, it being sci-fi. But the way he also structures these books is there's a sort of mysterious element to it that sort of gets slowly found out, and I felt like that started to fall apart a bit with Fall of Hyperion, in a way that while some things were quite cut and dry and apparent, there were a lot of parts that concerned aspects of the story that I never really got a great idea about them, and it didn't really seem to be as consequential to the grander story. It just seemed a bit messy in many ways, and while Hyperion was a bit tighter, I can't help but look at Fall of Hyperion and Hyperion as being essentially together, because Fall of Hyperion ends this narrative. And I know there is Endymion and Rise of Endymion, which have many characters from the Fall of Hyperion. There were a lot of parts of Hyperion that I just felt were kind of consistently meetings, and they were the characters talking about it just wasn't as interesting. They were talking about aspects of Hyperion that sort of were either gone over and over in a different way, or they didn't seem to me to have as much emotional or thematic weight to the story. It was sort of a bit convoluted and messy. That being said, I'm glad I read it. I'm glad I finished this duology, and I might consider reading Endymion. But overall, it's a good book. It's a decent book. It's an alright sequel. I would say it's a decent book. It's an alright sequel. Most interesting character relations, in my opinion, would be I quite liked Saul, and I quite liked I liked Mina Gladstone as well. The other pilgrims, many of the pilgrims, their stories aren't as interesting this time around. I didn't think, while I like Kassad as a character, I have a hard time wrapping my head around his significance. And the same being said for the poet. I think Braun Lamia, who was quite a significant character before, she is in the novel quite a lot, but I didn't feel as much weight to her, with her being there, or her scenes. And the same can be said about the consul. I felt like the consul was kind of almost a non-character. The priest I did quite enjoy, though. The priests. But overall, Hyperion, decent sequel. It was alright. Catch you later.